When ancient communities stored grain, they were not planning for convenience. They were planning for famine, siege, drought, and winter isolation. Grain was life insurance, political stability, and survival compressed into dry kernels. Long before modern pantries, plastic bins, and climate-controlled storage rooms, ancient farmers relied on a method so reliable that entire civilizations endured multi-year crop failures without collapse. That method was sealed subterranean grain storage, and its reliability still surpasses most modern household systems. This is not folklore. It is engineering born of necessity. How underground grain pits outperformed surface storage in hostile conditions. Ancient grain pits used across Europe, North Africa, the Middle East and Asia were deliberately placed below the frost line and above groundwater. These pits maintained remarkably stable temperatures year-round. While surface pantries fluctuate with daily heat, cold snaps and humidity, underground pits remained cool, dry and dark. Temperature stability slowed insect reproduction. Darkness reduced mold growth. The surrounding soil acted as a natural humidity regulator. Grain stored underground was insulated from fire, theft, and weather damage in ways modern kitchens cannot replicate. This was not accidental. It was learned through centuries of failure. Why sealing mattered more than ventilation in ancient storage logic. Modern advice often emphasizes airflow, but, ancient storage took the opposite approach. Grain pits were sealed intentionally to create low-oxygen environments. Once sealed, respiration from the grain and any insects consumed remaining oxygen, creating conditions where pests could not survive. This passive atmosphere control required no technology. Clay, packed earth, stone lids, ash layers and lime seals formed airtight barriers. Once sealed properly, grain could remain viable for years. Ventilation was a liability. Isolation was protection. How grain was prepared before storage to prevent spoilage. Ancient farmers did not store grain casually. Preparation was rigorous. Grain was harvested at full maturity, thoroughly dried, and often sun-winnowed multiple times. Any moisture trapped inside kernels invited disaster. In some cultures, grain was lightly parched before storage to kill insect eggs without damaging germination. Others mixed grain with fine ash, powdered charcoal, or dried herbs to deter pests. These additives absorb moisture and created inhospitable conditions for insects. Preparation mattered as much as the pit itself. Why ash and lime were silent guardians of stored grain. Wood ash was widely used as a desiccant and insect deterrent. It absorbed humidity and disrupted insect respiration. Lime, when used carefully, created alkaline environments hostile to pests and mold. These substances were placed as layers rather than mixed indiscriminately. A base layer protected against ground moisture. A top seal prevented air exchange. Grain remained untouched in between. Modern pantries rarely manage humidity this deliberately. Now, let's consider how long-term storage really changed social resilience. Communities with effective grain pits, they managed to survive sieges and bad harvests, while others, well, they simply collapsed. Archaeological sites show grain pits that were actually capable of feeding families for multiple years. Some of these were even hidden, ensuring survival even when settlements were raided. This storage method, it reduced dependence on annual yields. It created what we might call strategic patience. Grain, in this way, became a buffer against chaos. These days, modern households often store, at best, just weeks of food. How modern pantries fail, where ancient pits succeeded. Modern pantries, well, they prioritize access and convenience. Cabinets are exposed to temperature swings, humidity, light, and pests. Even sealed containers, are opened frequently, reintroducing moisture and insects. Plastic bins tend to trap humidity if grain is not perfectly dried. Shelving near kitchens absorbs heat and steam. Infestation spreads easily across containers. Ancient pits were not opened casually. They were sealed with intent and discipline. So, how can this ancient method be adapted today, you might wonder, without actually living underground? Well, the principles are still very much applicable. Stable temperature, low humidity, darkness, and reducing oxygen, those really are the priorities. These days, modern equivalents include things like buried food caches, insulated root cellars, and sealed containers stored below living spaces rather than in kitchens. For practical application, grain should be dried thoroughly stored in airtight containers and placed in the coolest part of a structure. Oxygen absorbers, can effectively replicate those ancient low-oxygen conditions. Ash or food-safe desiccants can assist humidity control. The mindset matters as much as the materials. Why ancient grain storage treated food as infrastructure, not inventory? Ancient people understood that food security was structural. It required planning, restraint, and respect for natural processes. Grain pits were built once and maintained for generations. They were not improvised solutions. Modern systems often treat food as disposable and replaceable. But ancient systems, well, they assumed scarcity and planned accordingly. That difference, honestly, explains their reliability. What history reveals about the true enemy of stored grain is quite surprising. The greatest threat was not insects or rodents. It was, in fact, moisture and air. Ancient storage focused relentlessly on controlling both. Everything else followed. When moisture and oxygen were removed, time slowed. Why this ancient trick remains relevant in uncertain times. Supply chains fail, power grids falter, climate instability increases spoilage risks. Ancient grain storage principles require no electricity, no plastics, and no constant oversight. They are resilient because they assume failure elsewhere. That is why they endured. If you value deep historical knowledge that translates into practical resilience, support the work of Echoes of Valor. Subscribe to the channel, share this guide with those who care about history and preparedness, and help keep these hard-earned lessons alive for the future.